Hey everyone, and welcome to this video on critical strikes in Path of Exile. We will focus a little bit more on formulas and calculations with some examples here to make things a little bit clearer, give you a better understanding on how to scale your critical strike chance. On the screen here, I just displayed a simplified version of the calculation on critical strike chance in the game. It takes your base critical strike chance and multiplies it by your increased critical strike chance. Let's go through an example to put this into practical terms. Every time you cast a spell and hit the defender, which is a random mob in the game, it rolls on the server side a value between 0 and 99.99. Now, depending on what your critical strike chance is, you need to roll a critical strike hit, which the server does for you as well, that is equal to or higher than the enemy that is the defender in this case. For an example, if you roll 69 on the defender, this all happens server side, you need a critical strike chance of 69.01 or more to land a critical strike on this enemy. So as we said, it's base crit times your increased critical strike chance. Base critical strike chance can be increased by things like Assassin's Mark. The third blue line on Assassin's Mark says that you get plus 1.5 critical strike chance. This is base critical strike chance. Now, depending on if you're using a spell or an attack, this gets calculated a little bit differently, either based on the spell's base crit or your weapons, but we'll get into that a bit later. And then you have sources of increased critical strike chance, for example, power charges or nodes on the tree, which increases your chance to deal a critical strike. Here is an example. So again, critical strike chance is base crit times increased crit. So we're just saying we have 6 power charges in both cases, either using Bladeful of Impaling, as I'm doing in the video that I'm playing in the background, or Ice Nova. Ice Nova has 6% base critical strike chance, Bladeful of Impaling has 10%. I did some uh, calculations here at the bottom saying base percent crit chance 0.1, that is basically 10% in decimal value. And then I take 6 times 0.4, which is 40% critical strike chance per power charge, and then you get a value of 24% chance to deal a critical strike. I've done the same with Ice Nova, and that you can see delivers us a value of 14.4%. So the base critical strike value in this case is what makes a difference. Now let's do an example on Assassin's Mark because I find this pretty interesting. So if your defender, this is the guy that you're attacking, rolls 69 server side again, and it's an unmarked enemy, if your critical strike chance is, let's take Ice Nova for example, 6 times 1000% increased critical strike chance from multiple sources, you roll a value of 60 and you will not land a critical strike. Now, if the enemy is marked, this adds 1.5% base critical strike chance, which lands you with 75% at the end of the calculation, which will be a critical strike since it is bigger than 69 that the defender rolled. Now, something interesting that I've discovered after some research is if you mark a rare mob in a pack and you have, let's say, Ice Nova, as in our example, with our increased critical strike chance of 1000, that means that the mark enemy will receive a critical strike, but all of the enemies around it won't. So this is the same for single target spells and for area of effect spells. The defender values gets calculated once per attack or spell that has the potential to deal a critical strike. Very interesting about this example, it shows you what happens if you hit a pack of mobs, one of them being marked, the rest unmarked, that all of the unmarked enemies in this instance with defenders rolling 69 as their value that you need to meet or exceed to deal a critical strike, all of the unmarked enemies will not receive critical strike chance, but the marked enemy will. So it's not that critical strikes is calculated per individual enemy, but a mark like Assassin's Mark that increases base critical strike chance does allow you to crit some mobs and not others. And if you use, for example, a spell like Arc, Arc will also, if even if you hit the marked enemy first, it will crit the marked enemy, but it will not crit the unmarked enemies again because the defender roll that the server does, if you deal a critical strike chance or not, is only done once per cast of a spell or attack. Now, let's talk about attack critical strikes because these are slightly more complex to calculate. Critical strike for attacks is your critical strike chance that we have talked about in the previous examples, which is base crit times increased critical strike chance, and it multiplies it by your accuracy. Now, this just calculates if an attack will be a critical strike. Thereafter, the game checks your accuracy to see if that critical strike that you have rolled actually lands. This has the effect, basically, that attack critical strike chance is critical strike chance calculation times accuracy squared. So it is extremely important to cap your accuracy or have it as high as possible in attack base critical strike builds. So if your attack hits, gets added onto the attack crit calculation, which is why it is accuracy squared, because it's attack critical strike chance that gets calculated and rolled against your accuracy, and then also it checks your accuracy again to see if your critical potential attack actually lands on the enemy. I will link in the video description some sources and references if you want to read up more in detail about these concepts. I hope you found this helpful and informative. If you're interested in the build that I'm playing footage of in the background, I'll link the video guide I made on that build in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.